Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing fabulously well and you've had a lovely day. And if you need a refreshing cool drink, by all means go and get it. Or if you want something warm and cosy, like a hot cup of cocoa, go and get that as well, because I've got a fabulous story for you. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I parked my white BMW outside my daughter's apartment in her allotted parking space. Her apartment in reality was a divided portion of a sizable grand mansion with its formal rigid symmetry, typical Georgian influences, along with its formal arches, pediments and orgy tops. It was part of a formal, elaborate Georgian residence that had been built here back in the day. It had been the residential mansion of a very high-profile family. It was hard to fathom that a small family of only 6 people could have lived in a home so large in fact that you could easily get lost in it. Now, thankfully, with the advent of modern architecture, it had meticulously been subdivided into individual stately-looking apartments. But on the outside, it really did look like one great big grandiose posh palatial mansion that overlooked exquisite panoramic views of statuesque mountains that faded in the background like faint smudges of purple on the landscape. In the foreground was a vast expanse of tall, verdant ponderosa pines that stretched back for many miles, and preceding that was a large undulating flowery meadow where horses were sometimes seen grazing. The dignified baronial mansion had a long line of brightly coloured ornate front doors that designated every single apartment, all with its own brass postal box and number plate. My daughter's was a bright cerise pink, which she called the Flamingo. It was apartment number 3. I smiled happily to myself as I climbed out of my BMW, while slamming the door behind me. I was so proud of my little Lola, who was not so little anymore, but to me she would always be my little perfect princess. In truth, she was all I had in the entire world. My husband had died several years back from a very aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. I grimaced at this rather alarming thought as I made my way to my daughter's rather attractive pink front door. Naturally, I still wished she lived at home with me, but then she was 25, with great aspirations in her career in the textile industry. She was now in senior management, doing exceedingly well for herself, bringing in a sizable income. I swelled with a mother's pride as I turned the key in the lock, walking through her very fashionable home that had been lavishly decorated with classic vintage furnishings that were unlikely to become passé or dated. I moved towards the long, luxurious-looking, graceful cream curtains, drawing them back to allow the full light of the morning to permeate the house. I opened a couple of windows to bring in some much-needed fresh air, to refresh and deodorize the place, which was something my daughter always failed to do. The inside of her house was very open plan, efficient, methodical, streamlined, certainly suitable for an up-and-coming young woman like her. I meandered towards the kitchen. It was when I reached the large Frankie stainless steel sink that my blood ran cold. There was no cereal bowl in the sink, nor any telltale splashes of milk on the large granite counter, or some spilled cereal flakes on the floor. Nor was there any dishes from the previous night now soaking in the sink under the suds, or even an empty glass of wine on the counter. All the stuff I would invariably wash up and put away before my daughter returned home. I liked to keep the place spick and span for her. I knew she could, of course, hire a cleaner, but it was nothing for me to take charge of her home for her, collect her dry cleaning, do a little food shopping for her, as her taxing, challenging, high-profile job demanded so much time from her. Too much, actually. I liked to be a help whenever I could, which she rarely appreciated. If my daughter was anything, she was a creature of routine and habit. My mind began to scream and panic. If there was no cereal bowl in the sink, no leftover dinner plates from the previous night, then maybe my daughter hadn't come home last night. Where was she? I charged to her bedroom, thundering towards the door, standing there in the entrance. I sucked in a deep breath. The large queen-sized wooden sleigh bed was the way I'd made it yesterday, with the pretty cream scatter cushions arranged precisely over the satin aquamarine bedspread. Nothing had been touched, not a single thing. This was unusual. There were no clothes strewn over the floor, no pyjamas lying bunched up in the corner, no used white toweling robe lying across the chair, no cushions lying scattered across the floor like white water lilies in a pond. Everything was exactly the way I left it the previous day. I began to panic. A cold chill ran down my spine like a powerful electric surge. Something was wrong, very, very wrong. I could feel it in the depths of my gut. I began to feel violently sick as the bitter taste of bile rose up in the back of my throat. Oh my God! Where was my precious Lola? I trembled as I pulled out my cell phone from my pocket, dialing her office. "Hello," I said. "Can I speak to Lola Farrell, please?" There was an awkward silence at the other end of the phone. "Hello," said the voice. "This is Jim Napier speaking. I'm afraid Lola Farrell has not come in this morning to work, nor has she phoned in sick. I am terribly concerned because we have a very important meeting together with the chief executive of Myla Compass this morning. It's most unlike Lola not to turn up for work. I have tried to contact her on her cell, but there isn't any response. You wouldn't happen to know where she is, how I can contact her, would you?" "No, I'm very sorry," I trembled. "I don't. That's actually why I'm phoning you. There's no sign of her having returned home last night. Her bed hasn't been slept in." "Oh dear, that is very troubling. That is unlike Lola. She's the most structured person I know. Keep me posted if you hear anything." "Will do so," I said. I switched off the cell phone, staring vacantly into space for a moment. My mind was empty, devoid of thoughts, because thinking hurt. It really hurt. Then I bounced out of my enforced coma, allowing myself to wallow in the horrifying reality that something quite dreadful, something quite appalling had happened to my daughter. But what? Maybe she was lying dead in a ditch somewhere. Maybe she'd been mugged or even murdered. The very thought had me spinning into an overdrive like an out-of-control tornado that could not be calmed. I needed to phone all the hospitals in Washington first to see if anyone fitting Lola's description had been brought into accident and emergency, but it would seem I was drawing blanks at every turn. A feeling of impending dread hung across my mind, like the thunderclouds gathering across the horizon before a big storm breaks. Something quite dreadful and calamitous had happened to Lola. I knew it. I could feel it in my gut. I tried so desperately not to cry, but a lone tear flew down my cheek too fast for me to catch. "Get a grip, woman," I told myself firmly. "What use are you to Lola, with a brain like paper mache?" Before long I was seated at a desk at the police station, my head whirling. Crazy thoughts spouted out of my mind like the water from a whale's air hole. I glanced at the pinboard. I wish I hadn't. My heart sank. I saw 3 pictures of missing people on newspaper snippets, whom clearly were lost. They'd never been found, for indeed if they had, those paper cuttings would have been removed a long time ago. If the police hadn't managed to find them, what chance did I have of them finding my Lola? Would my daughter's face be joining them, I pondered. I could feel the nausea rising in the back of my throat as the officer entered the office. I think I wanted to be sick. He was rather a streamlined officer, very well presented, with an immaculate thick thatch of silvery hair, and very attractive brown eyes that were sharp, discerning, rather like a bird of prey, I thought. He moved towards me with swift, efficient gestures as he shook my hand. His grip was firm, somewhat reassuring, his smile serious, attentive, and infectious. "So you're Mrs. Farrell. You're here to report a missing person, am I right?" He took out his pad and paper to write down some notes. "So who is it that is missing?" "My daughter. She never showed up for work this morning. There was no cereal bowl with a splash of milk on the counter, no dishes soaking in the sink from last night's dinner, nor had her bed been slept in, and she didn't have a bath last night, which is most unlike her." "I see," said the sheriff, rubbing his chin reflectively. "How old is your daughter, Mrs. Farrell?" "She's 25. "You say that she's been missing since last night?" "That's right, Sheriff." "Mrs. Farrell," said the sheriff. "I've been doing missing cases for a very long time, I have to tell you. In most cases, the person invariably does show up. That is the good news, of course. Your daughter has not been gone for very long. We cannot put her down as a missing person yet. She is not a minor. She's an adult. She's 25. There are all manner of explanations as to why she's not there. Was her car at home? No, it's not there. There you are, said the sheriff reassuringly. Maybe she went somewhere, went away for a while, met someone. Anything could have happened. Officer, I piped, you don't understand. A lump was beginning to develop in the back of my throat. My pensive voice became subdued, grave, very downcast. I felt as if the weight of the entire world had suddenly been placed on my shoulders. It was as if my knees were beginning to buckle under the very gravity of trying to get through to this man, that I knew very well that my daughter was most certainly missing. I could feel the anger, indignation, irritation, umbrage and annoyance rising in my gut. It was all I could do not to throttle the officer with the back of his crystal vase that was on his desk, filled with wilting flowers that had certainly seen better days. How I wanted to do it! I was as mad as hell. Why could he not understand? If I said my daughter had gone missing, why did he not take me seriously? I knew my daughter better than anybody else did. Officer, I repeated, you don't seem to comprehend the gravity of what I am stressing to you. This is very, very important. I need you to understand. My daughter is a creature of habit. She's set in her ways. She's a creature of routine. This behaviour is not like her. A mother definitely knows her own daughter. When I say there's something wrong, believe me when I say that. There is something terribly, terribly wrong. You have to do something. Surely there is something you can do. Look, I empathise with your plight. I really do, said the officer. But I cannot unleash all that manpower just to search for your daughter until we have really established that she is indeed missing. She's a grown-up 25-year-old woman. She's responsible for herself. She lives on her own, as you have told me, is answerable to no one. There could be a very harmless explanation as to why she never returned home last night. She might have met someone. She's an unmarried woman. Come back to the station in 48 hours. Then we'll talk. I felt as wilted as one of the flowers in his glass vase. Why was he not taking me seriously? If he wasn't going to search for my daughter, then I'd have to start looking for her myself. I felt aggrieved, cheated, enraged that this officer was not recruiting any help in regards to my daughter's disappearance. Something really baneful, pernicious, or even insidious could have happened to her. The longer you left it, invariably the worse it became. Did he not realise that? Before long I was knocking on all the brightly coloured doors of people living in the lavish Georgian apartments. Some people were still at work. Others were at home, and willing to talk to me, with no clues as to the whereabouts of my daughter. It would seem that they knew her in passing, but not on a personal level. But no one appeared to have seen her. Finally I knocked on my daughter's immediate next-door neighbour's house, as I had seen the young man return from shopping with a couple of brown paper bags from the delicatessens. He parked his car on the street corner. I could hear the chain being pulled back from the door. Then the bright canary-coloured yellow door suddenly opened. He was a young man in his early 30s, rather handsome really, with hazel-brown hair, blue eyes and a boyish-looking face. Hello. If you're looking for sponsors, I'm very sorry, but I've done 3 raffles this week, and I'm inundated with them. I can't do any more. No, I'm here about your next-door neighbour, I said, putting my foot in the door quickly in case he slammed it in on me. My daughter. Have you seen her? Oh, you mean that pretty young woman that lives next door behind that pink door? The very one, I said. She's my daughter. Have you seen her at all recently? Well, I often see her after work. She tends to go into the woods for a hike. I notice she returns home, puts on her pink gym gear, and goes power walking in those woods over there. This was news to me, something my daughter had never mentioned off the cuff. "What woods?" I asked. "Oh, the ones at the back of the properties here. There's a wooded area with hiking trails for people to go walking there with dogs. You know, that sort of thing. Your daughter tends to go there every day after work for a bit of light exercise, I imagine." "Thank you," I said. "Did you happen to see her yesterday go into the woods? It's very important. You see, her car's not parked in her space. I need to know if she returned home at all last night." "Let me think," said the man, looking befuddled. "In truth, I'm not altogether very sure. It feels like I saw her yesterday, but then again, I could be mistaken. I am sorry, but I don't want to give you false information to get your hopes up. I'd hate to do that to you. I may have seen her, or I might not have done so." "So you think you saw her yesterday, but you could be mistaken?" "That's right. You see, I see her going into the woods every single day. It's so routine for her. Maybe I thought I saw her yesterday, but in fact I saw her the day before, if you see what I mean." "I understand what you're saying. You could be muddled. You could have got your wires crossed." "That's right. You see, if her car's not parked in her space, then it may be that she never returned home. I notice her car is always parked in her space. You cannot fail to notice a bright pink truck." "These woods at the back of the property you're talking about," I asked, "are they regular hikers going in and out of the woods there?" "Not really," said the young man. "Most people tend to go to the park, about a street or so down. It's very open, spacious, lots of undulating green grass, plenty of trees, park benches, dogs and ice cream vans. People tend to socialise and interact with other dogs there. As far as I know, I only see your daughter going into those woods. I was only thinking recently that it wasn't a good idea, her going in there alone. There are not many people around there. So it is possible that no one has been in that wooded area since yesterday afternoon. Is that what you're saying?" The man's face lit up in surprise, almost as if a light had come on in his head. "Oh, I see what you're getting at. You're wondering whether she might have had an accident in those woods. But it does not explain why her car is not in the parking bay. Unless what?" I asked. "Unless her car is in for servicing." I gasped. I hadn't actually thought of that, really. It's a very distinct possibility, you know. I do remember she mentioned that she needed her truck looked at. She felt there was something rather problematic going on with her handbrake. "Well, that sounds like a problem that needs immediate attention, that you can't delay," said the man. "Wait a moment, I'm coming with you," he said, grabbing his coat. "My name is Carlo, by the way. Carlo Bartholomew." "I'm Lillian Farrow," I said. "My daughter's name is Lola." "Pleased to meet you, Lillian," he said, flashing me a big white smile. "Please don't look so sad. I'm quite sure no harm has become of your daughter." His words did not reassure me, although I knew he meant well. He had gone out of a limb to help me. I should have been grateful, but my mind was screaming, "Where is Lola? My baby, my precious, precious baby!" My face was fixed. My heart was doing flip-flops. I was so anxious, so afraid, so nonplussed about what could have happened to her. It was like she had disappeared off the entire face of the earth. To the rear of this illustrious Georgian residential apartment block was a sizable flowering meadow, which I'd understood from my daughter would soon be divided into different long narrow yards for each resident. Lola was exceedingly excited about having her own backyard. She had already organised a garden designer to plan for her the perfect backyard space, or tranquil oasis if you like, with pretty flowering plants, a fountain, along with a scattering of outdoor furnishings under a gazebo. Carlo walked by my side as we traipsed through the meadow towards the collection of tall ponderosa pines that fringed the edge of a woodland expanse that sprawled out into a vast, rather resplendent-looking sylvan. "I had absolutely no idea it was so idyllic out here," said Carlo, looking rather bewildered. "No wonder your daughter likes hiking here every day for a little light exercise. Why, I do believe it is a lot better than the park down the road." Well, I'm not so sure it's a good idea, like you were saying. I mean, ambling around in a wooded area all on your own. Anything could happen, especially if other people aren't around. True, said Carla. Possibly not the wisest choice. Is your daughter antisocial by any chance? Oh, very. She's a private, contained person who keeps herself to herself, likes her own company. She's structured, disciplined, but messy. I know because I spend my life cleaning after her. She sounds a lot like myself. I am rather antisocial, reticent too, but messy. No, I'm not messy. Before long we were trekking into the heart of the woods. How I wished I could have appreciated the natural beauty of this abundant, arresting, shaded sanctuary, but I'm afraid it escaped me. It went flying past me, rather like a bird on a wing, escaping my scrutiny. For my frantic eyes were discerning and sharp like that of an owl on the trail of a mouse, searching the forest floor for any signs of my precious Lola. A gentle wind whistled through the trees. The graceful needles of the ponderosa pine swayed elegantly, rather like a regal queen raising her hand to an adoring audience. The forest floor was dark, rich, the soil fertile. It was covered in a scattering of ferns, mosses, needles, and interesting underbrush that I could not personally identify. It was a pleasantly cool, shaded, dark oasis where fragments of pretty ethereal light danced like little fairies through the canopy of the trees, causing the underlying brush to twinkle, sparkle, glitter with a silvery glaze. Pretty birdsong permeated the forest with its tranquil, uplifting music that became so mellow, reassuring, and incredibly enchanting. Then there was the fragrant smell of the ponderosa pines themselves, where vanilla, butterscotch, intermingled with balsamic citrusy smells that wafted in the air, complemented by the decadent earthen smells of the soil itself. All of a sudden I became very aware that Carlo and I were most certainly not alone. Something was watching us, but what? I glanced at Carlo. I knew he sensed it too. I could see his square jawline tense up. His troubled eyes looked searching. All of a sudden, a pine cone was flung in our direction. Then another, and another. What was going on? Something seemed very eager to get our attention, but what? My question was soon to be answered, as a long veil of brush was pulled to one side like a curtain, and then we saw him. My heart literally leapt into my mouth. I wanted to scream, but my dry, scratchy throat seemed to shut down. My ability to say a word was hijacked, suppressed, overcome by terror of the likes that I have never ever experienced before. Every part of my being wanted to run, wanted to bolt, to get out of the woods as fast as I possibly could, as if my life depended on it, but I could not. I was helplessly tied to this place like the roots of a tree that firmly anchored me to the ground, pulling me down. I had become like one of those ponderosa pines, stuck to one place, unable to budge an inch. I was a sitting duck, waiting to be devoured by this great, mighty beast, served to him on an ornate silver tray for hors d'oeuvres. But what was this incongruous thing? Then it hit me like a thunderous wall of ice, shattering everything in its wake. Oh, my word! I couldn't believe it. This was the legendary creature known as Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or Yeti. I tried to remember whether I should be afraid of it or not, but my memory of fleeting programs that I'd watched with my daughter on television all but faded. I knew that, like human beings, you could get good Bigfoots and bad ones, but how could you tell the difference? To look at, this creature was a giant, its silhouette and shape like that of a human, only 4 times the size of the average man. It was enormous. It was covered in hair like a black bear, only the hair was finer, more human-like. It gleamed, shone in the light of the morning, as if it had been perfectly brushed for hours on end. There was no hint of the nasty odorous smell often reported about in Bigfoot encounters. I smelt nothing hideous at all. On the contrary, all I could smell was the essence of pine wafting through the forest like a refreshing deodorizer. Everything about this incongruous creature intimidated me, as its presence was daunting, dominating, overwhelming, if you like. Almost like someone of far superior rank, authority or power was in my vicinity, rather like a pope, or a king even, or even an archbishop or film star. someone that demanded great respect. I know that sounds very strange and rather peculiar, but that is exactly what I felt. I was to find out later that Carla felt the same way as I did. The Bigfoot's face was remarkably human, but it was those deep-set dark eyes that really got my attention, aroused my curiosity and interest. This creature was remarkably intelligent, very evolved, possibly cleverer than most human beings. He was certainly in tune with his environment, like nothing I've ever seen before. He seemed spiritual, deep, reflective, and very discerning. He indicated for us to follow him, and we did without question. It was the intelligence of his eyes that eclipsed my fear, so that it dissipated and evaporated as fast as the rising steam from a pot of vegetables boiling away on the gas hob. It was then that I realized the Bigfoot was not just an animal. He was of human origin, and of that I'm in no doubt. Granted, he had ape-like influences to his appearance, but I saw in him a creature that was remarkably human. He led us to a precipitous area in the woods that inclined downwards towards a deep valley below, where a stream trickled at the lowest elevation, and not far from the stream lay a humped blob of pink that looked decidedly like a lumpy sleeping bag. It was Lola. I ran towards my daughter, my heart thumping 1,000 miles an hour in my chest. I was certain my precious little daughter was dead. She was lying there with a dry patch of blood on her head. She was breathing, but was totally unconscious. "You mustn't move her," said Carlo. "I'm a doctor. We can't move her in case she's injured on her spine or something. I'm calling for an ambulance now. Yes, it's Dr. Carl Bartholomew. Yes, I'm here with a patient right now. Washington. It's on the corner of 3rd Street. The woods at the back of the property. That's right. Please hurry. Suspected head injury." I looked up to see the Bigfoot looking at me. He nodded as if to say, "I can leave her in your hands now." I nodded back at him. He glided away. To cut a long story short, my daughter was dropped off home by an Uber driver that night, as her car had been taken in for servicing, as we had suspected. It would seem that she got attired in her gym clothes and went hiking through those woods. In a trice she tripped over a stone that was jutting through the soft earth. She lost her balance and went colliding backwards down the incline, hitting her head hard against another stone, when she drifted in and out of consciousness. She did remember the warmth of a crackling fire during the night, along with some kind of blanket being placed over her, which she now believes was an animal skin. She saw a dark, shadowy figure watching over her. She did remember concerned, deep-set dark eyes, and a gentle touch of a hand on her body. I'm in no doubt that the Bigfoot we encountered rescued her and watched over her during the night, protecting her from predators. My daughter was woozy for an entire week, due to the severe knocking to her head that impacted her long-term memory, like her childhood, where she was born and where she went to school growing up. Luckily, that didn't last. One of my daughter's first visitors was her next-door neighbour, Carlo. From the moment they first met, it was pretty much love at first sight, because they had so much in common. They're now very happily married, and they've joined the 2 Georgian apartments together and renovated it into one large home with a sizable backyard, which is perfect for the 2 little girls that they now have, Tammy and Teresa. So now I have 2 granddaughters to worry about, but a Bigfoot may be watching over them from the forest that fringes their yards. I sincerely hope so. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.